millennials: needy, dumb, young, entitled, selfish, shallow, disrespectful, they can't learn anything, they're impatient, all sorts of horrible things like that. That's what comes to mind when you think about millennials, because there's been a lot of negative press about millennials. I think millennials have been misunderstood and mismanaged, and it's really important for people who are transitioning to senior management to understand the millennials and what they can bring to the table so that they can be better managed and turned into profit centers rather than mere investments for the future. My advice to people transitioning to senior management is that you've got to manage everyone, right? One of the key things about being in senior management is that you've got a lot more responsibility for a lot of people. So you have to have alignment, and that means alignment of objectives, but it also means alignment of the various generations that you might have working for you. So not only do you have to carry the people who've been long in the organization with you, you've got to carry the people who are younger and may have new blood and new ideas along with you also. Now, there's always conflict when you're transitioning from middle management to senior management, and a lot of it is around this misconception and mismanagement of millennials. So a key thing that you have to carry out is communication, effective communication. And the only way that you're going to enable effective communication is by building trust. The millennials are thought of as distrustful, disrespectful, etc. But really, you have to understand their point of view. And likewise, the older people are thought of as slow and steady, but really, really impatient. They don't listen to new ideas. So somewhere along the line, you've got to sit down and reconcile the two. What are your ideas, millennials? What are your ideas, older people? Where is a happy medium that we can come to so that ultimately we can achieve the objectives for which we have been all employed? And that is a very key thing. Traditional work models actually stress the need for people to be given autonomy and flexibility in the workplace. So it's not something that was started off by millennials, right? From time, we've had women who go on maternity leave, who return, who are allowed to work flexible work hours. And then over time, there's been an evolution of people being allowed to work from home, etc., etc. And that has nothing to do with the millennials. So it's just that when it's linked to millennials, people somehow rise up and say, no, this is the millennial wanting to do things their own way. Focus on the objectives and make sure you give the millennials a lot of autonomy to decide how they want to do it, and flexibility as to when they want to do it can make a huge difference. Ultimately, you want to achieve a goal, and that is what you have to come to agreement on. When people say how best to work with millennials, a lot of the time they say, how best to handle millennials. I mean, you handle your, handbag, you handle eggs gently, you handle dangerous pets. Millennials are human, and ultimately what they're bringing to the workplace are facets of their own personalities, just as non-millennials are bringing facets of their non-personalities to the workplace. I think it's critical for any senior manager who is going to handle a great team, including millennials, to understand where the millennial is coming from. A lot of millennials are actually quite introverted because they've grown up in a technological age. So a lot of their relationships are virtual, they're online. So when you request them to be there physically for you, a lot of the cues that we older generation are used to seeing, we tend to now condense into one or two things. So the millennial wants to come to work without a tie. You immediately decide that, he doesn't know how to dress properly for work. Well, why should he? He's been sitting in front of his computer most of the time, and nobody's ever criticized him for, not wearing a tie. So it's really critical for us to understand where the millennial is coming from in terms of what's going on in their minds and in their heads, and to bring out what their competencies are and use that in the workplace rather than rising to judgment and saying, he's disrespectful because he called me by my first name. At the end of the day, if you're dealing with people a lot online, does it really matter whether they call you Mr. this or Mrs. that or Dr. this or Dr. that? What is important is, what are you getting from that person? And so I think it's very important to realize that these millennials that we keep talking about have personality differences that may have evolved over time. And therefore, what we're judging is actually inaccurate. I think transparency and mutual respect, and all this is linked again to communication, but transparency is really about making your views known to them. Don't, brief behind their backs and say, oh, these millennials are this, these millennials are that. Because ultimately, if you're not nice to them, they're not going to be nice to you. And you probably need them more than they need you. They have all the modern technology. They know what to do. It's important for you to know the millennials' likes and dislikes, but it's also important for them to know your likes and dislikes. Ultimately, the millennial values transparency. So let's be clear about what we want. No briefing behind anybody's back, right? Because that only leads to conflicts, passive aggression, things that are not good for the workplace. What's also really, really critical is to say to yourselves, right, this millennial has done good. Millennials are used to being battered. So it's very, very critical to give them instant feedback about how they're doing. This is really, really critical for the millennial. Because remember, they're used to instant responses. So all these traditional things about, I've got to wait 6 months and I've got to wait, one year before I give them feedback about their performance might not work very well for the millennial. Give them instant feedback so that they're constantly aware that, they're being recognized. However, working with millennials can be a lot of fun if you just remember C, must. C, communication. M, mutual respect. A, autonomy. S, for self-awareness. And T, for transparency. C, must. Remember all those and you'll have a lot of fun working with your millennials.